Well, it's great to have PRI in person here in Cape Town on African soil for the first time. We have about 400 people in the room, representing approximately 35 trillion US dollars in assets under management. I think the big takeaway for myself from this conference is that we've got a lot of broad support for the PRI initiative. And it's now, we're heading towards 10 years, we're 7 years into the initiative. I think the big takeaway is we've done a lot of talking, we've done a lot of caucusing, we know where we want to go, but we're still in the process of implementing. And I think the big takeaway for myself and everyone else is we need to really start getting progress when it comes to implementing the 6 principles.
The big takeaway from me is that as the investment landscape changes in the world, it's not just about commercial outputs and outcomes, but it's also around issues of sustainability beyond just the numbers. It's about sustainability from an environmental perspective, a social perspective, and most importantly, issues around governance. And the fact that leadership is at the forefront of making sure that these issues are managed, proactively managed, and that we make sure that we holistically empower our organizations to be ethical investors.
Well, I think the conference has been a great opportunity to bring together investors with a real consciousness of environmental, social, and governance excellence, or lack thereof, in the capital markets.
Well, I think probably it's more an observation than a point in particular. I think the observation is just how big the tent is getting. That if you've been following the space for any length of time, the number of people in the room has multiplied significantly, which says one of 2 things to me. Either the conference venues are really good, but probably more importantly, the issue is really critical and is moving to the top of the agenda for many, many companies or asset managers and for asset owners. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's gone from being a small initiative in the 2006 when it launched. The first conference that I attended, there were probably less than 100 people there. Today, over 450 people probably in attendance at the main plenary session. So to me, that's more the observation, that this area of ESG is gaining traction. I think post the crisis in 2008, it's starting to hit its straps. It's finding relevance. It resonates with what the key social issues are around the world. It isn't bound by sort of geography. It's a global issue, and it ultimately goes to the heart of the stability of the financial system.
Much as I haven't attended all aspects of the conference, I arrived late, owing to other responsibilities. But what I picked up from the discussions that I've had is that the movement of conscientizing corporates across the world with respect to responsible investing, with respect to focusing more on the long term and less on the short term, seems to be taking hold. The seed was planted many moons ago. The root and the stems are beginning to show. However, what is also obvious is that there's still a long way to go. In some of the discussions that I sat on yesterday, it was very clear that the House was split in terms of how they understand long-term versus short-term. And looking at or following the debate, the difference for me is in the language. It seems like they all understand that the long term is very important. Staying in business, staying a going concern is very important, including those that were leaning on the short term. And I think the difference here is that we need to appreciate the separation between strategic objectives versus tactical objectives. Those that tend to lean towards the short term are focusing on the tactical interventions to achieve their long-term gains. Those that are focusing on the long term are saying, let's focus on the long term to inform our tactical interventions or short-term interventions. And I think if we can tighten the language and have a common understanding about what we're doing and why we're doing it, it will be much easier to preach the gospel. It has been made more difficult up until this point because of different interpretations.
I think the important thing is that the work that we've done in the Sustainable Returns Project is we're on the right track, and that responsible investing is the way and the right thing to do for trustees. Our project is aimed at the asset owners and for trustees to change their behaviour to be more responsible in line with the new legislation. And the learnings from the conference just endorses what we've done and justifies what we've done, and gives us confidence that we're on the right track. And that's one of the main learning things, that we're not out of sync, and that we do have international support for what we are doing locally. But also to say that what we've done locally in terms of the Sustainable Returns Project is that in many ways we're also leading the way, and we're proud of what we've done locally, because many of the delegates are in awe of what we have produced.
Well, I was one of the panelists where we were looking at how water risk can be evaluated and how it impacts on investment decisions. And I think for me, the real takeaway was how, as companies, we can improve our communication, disclosure, and reporting to the investor, so that it becomes useful to them to make the decision. Because for the longest of times, we've always done sustainable development reports, but what I found out today is that they're not really adding value because of the language. We normally focus on broader stakeholders, but they are very different stakeholders, and therefore they need information that is customized to actually meet their requirements, so that they can make easy investment decisions. And for me, just coming in here and listening to all the investors, it helped a lot to get that point across.
There's been quite a few interesting insights and ideas, I think, that you almost always collect at conferences like this. But one thing that struck me more than anything else, perhaps, is that there's investment opportunities in linking back, perhaps, to the real economy. You know, real needs, real interests that real people have. Why I say this, you know, it's obvious that the financial sector has lost its reputation over the past couple of years. And one sure way, perhaps, one way to retrieve it could be to prove our social utility once more. Now, it's obvious that such a thing is needed here in South Africa, but I think it's equally needed in other places around the world. And if you think about the themes that you could then find those opportunities in, it's in energy, it's in resources, natural resources, it's in creating employment opportunities. And I think that last point in particular came out loud and clear in the very first session of this conference.
So Africa has some of the fastest growing populations and economies in the world. It's doing some really interesting things in investment, particularly investment in infrastructure. It's also doing a lot about responsible investment. PRI is a global organisation, and we need to make sure that we're introducing our delegates and our signatories to what's happening around the world, not just what's happening in Europe or the US or in Australia. So I think this conference will have been invaluable for people to learn firsthand from a lot of Africans about exactly the opportunities, the exciting future that is Africa.
I thought that it was really interesting that we had an SGM, a signatory general meeting, where we actually had the possibility to hear from our signatories what they thought worked and also what they thought didn't work. And I think that is something that is important for the PRI to listen to, as we are. And I think the fact that voices were at times critical, but provided, I think, ideas that we can look at and can do something about, was something that I feel is the most important thing that we and I carry home from.
I think it's a great opportunity to exchange some ideas and initiatives in the responsible investment space, and we have the opportunity to have a lot of people in different regions of the world, and how they are catching up this all of initiatives in these regions. I think is the most important issues.
I am here at the PRI today to speak on a panel on director nomination, and in that regard I also want to make an appeal for other signatories to participate in a project that we are doing with the PRI. The PRI has a steering committee on director nomination. The steering committee currently consists of 9 members. We are currently working on identifying best practice director nomination processes in a number of markets, And what we're hoping to do is identify best practice and then benchmark companies against these best practices, which will identify a list of companies which we hope to engage with. And what I hope to do is to appeal to people to come forward and participate in this project. It will be available on the clearinghouse in a couple of months. So if you are interested in this topic, please do come forward and please do let us know if you'd like to participate.
I believe that the most important thing in this conference that the conference show us that we need the standardization and the criteria and the process in all of the countries in the world. I think it's really important. In standardization, in principle, responsible investments, sure.
The most important thing about standing PRI is to look at the progress of responsible investment globally. And it is one of the most concentrated and advanced conference regarding ESG. So it is very helpful for me to gather information and to talk with people who are engaged in this issue.
Well, I think that the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, the organization really has been extremely successful, I think, over the last couple of years. And I think that the main thing to take away from the conference is just the ability of the PRI to bring together major players around the world in terms of asset owners, asset managers, researchers, analysts, and I think it's pretty exciting to see the kind of progress that the PRI is making in the investment community.